The dog had not crossed the frozen city looking for warmth. He had come looking for a name. At 2:47 on a December morning, snow moved sideways across Spokane, Washington, sweeping over empty streets and burying the sidewalks beneath nearly 8 inches of white. The temperature had fallen to 12 degrees, cold enough to turn every breath into a pale cloud and make the metal railings outside Liberty Haven Veterans Shelter shine like glass. Inside, the old brick building rested beneath the storm. Pipes murmured behind the walls. A tired furnace pushed warm air through narrow vents. 23 veterans slept in small rooms along the second floor, each carrying memories that followed them even into dreams. Rachel Bennett was awake. She had managed Liberty Haven for 9 years, long enough to recognize the many sounds of a winter night, the settling of old wood, the rattle of a loose window, the soft footsteps of someone unable to sleep. But the sound that reached her from the rear entrance was different. 3 slow scratches moved across the glass. Then silence. Rachel looked up from the paperwork spread across her desk. The lamp beside her cast a warm circle over the pages, while beyond the office window the hallway remained dim and still. She waited. The scratching came again. Once, twice, 3 times. Not frantic, deliberate, almost patient. Rachel rose, pulled a wool cardigan over her shoulders, and walked toward the rear door. Cold gathered along the glass in silver feathers. At first, she saw only the reflection of the hallway behind her. Then lightning from a distant transformer flashed blue against the snow, revealing a dark shape curled beside the steps. She unlocked the door. Wind rushed inside, sharp with ice and pine smoke. The shape lifted its head. It was a German shepherd, an old one, judging by the gray around his muzzle. His sable coat was stiff with frost, darker along the spine, and small clumps of snow clung beneath his chest. A faded military harness wrapped around his lean body. One ear stood straight. The other bent slightly at the tip, as though time had softened it. His amber eyes found Rachel through the storm. There was no panic in them, only exhaustion. And something else. Expectation. "Easy boy," she whispered. The dog tried to stand. His front legs trembled, and for one fragile second, he held himself upright beneath the yellow security light. Then his strength left him. Rachel stepped forward and caught his shoulders before he struck the frozen pavement. He was lighter than he should have been. Beneath the thick coat, she felt the hard outline of ribs and the weak flutter of breath. "You made it," she said, though she had no idea where he had come from or how far he had walked. "You're inside now." The dog did not resist as she pulled him across the threshold on the heavy entry mat. Melted snow darkened the floor beneath him. Rachel shut the door against the wind and called for Marcus Hill, the overnight coordinator, who appeared moments later in sweatpants and an Old Navy sweatshirt. Together they wrapped the shepherd in 2 wool blankets and moved him onto a padded bench near the furnace room. Marcus hurried to call the emergency veterinarian who volunteered with the shelter. Rachel knelt beside the dog, rubbing warmth into his ears with careful hands. His eyes remained partly open. Every few seconds, they shifted toward the hallway leading to the residents' rooms. "Are you looking for someone?" she asked. His tail moved once against the floor, barely an inch. That was when Rachel noticed the harness. It was not the bright nylon kind sold in pet stores. This one was olive drab, reinforced at the chest, with tarnished brass clips and stitching worn smooth by years of use. A small leather pouch had been sewn near the left shoulder. On the top strap sat a rectangular nameplate, partly hidden beneath ice. Rachel brushed it clean with her thumb. The first letters appeared slowly. SSGT. Beneath them was a name. Daniel Mercer. Below that, in smaller lettering, were the words USMC K9 Unit. Rachel stopped moving. The furnace clicked on behind her, sending a low vibration through the floor. Marcus returned with a phone pressed to his ear, but she raised one hand, asking him to wait. She read the name again. Daniel Mercer. Room 17. He had arrived at Liberty Haven 6 weeks earlier with one duffel bag, a folded Marine Corps jacket, and no emergency contact. He rarely spoke during meals. He sat with his back to the wall. On difficult nights, he walked the upstairs hallway until dawn, counting his steps beneath his breath. Rachel had once asked whether he had family. Daniel had stared through the window and said, "Not anymore." The shepherd released a thin breath. His eyes turned toward the staircase. Rachel followed his gaze. Above them, somewhere beyond the ceiling, Daniel Mercer was sleeping less than 50 feet away. The dog had reached a shelter filled with former service members in the middle of the worst storm of the year. Yet his harness carried the name of only one. Rachel placed her palm against the shepherd's chest and felt his heart struggling beneath the frozen fur. "You didn't come here by accident," she murmured. The dog's eyes closed, but his head remained pointed toward the stairs. Outside, the storm erased every track he had left behind. Inside, Rachel looked once more at the nameplate and understood that saving him was only the beginning. The greater question was waiting in room 17. Why had a dying K9 crossed a frozen city to find a man who believed there was nothing left in the world searching for him? Rachel climbed the narrow staircase with the name still burning in her thoughts. The shelter was quiet except for the wind pressing against the windows and the soft mechanical hum of the furnace below. A nightlight cast a pale amber glow across the second-floor hallway. Doors lined both sides, each marked with a simple brass number. Behind them slept men and women who had once answered alarms in places far from home, and who now woke at ordinary sounds they could not always explain. Room 17 stood near the end of the hall. Rachel stopped outside it and listened. At first, there was nothing. Then came the slow creak of floorboards. Daniel Mercer was already awake. He opened the door before she could knock. He wore a gray thermal shirt and faded sweatpants. His dark brown hair was flattened on one side, and the silver at his temples caught the hallway light. His face held the guarded stillness Rachel had come to recognize, but his green-gray eyes were alert. "What happened?" he asked. Rachel chose her words carefully. "A dog came to the back in trance." Daniel looked past her as though expecting to see it in the hall. "Is it hurt?" "Cold. Exhausted. Dr. Morgan is on her way." His shoulders loosened slightly. He had always noticed injured animals, even when he pretended not to notice people. Rachel continued, "It is a German shepherd, an older working dog." Something changed in his expression. It was small, no more than a tightening near the jaw, but Rachel saw it. "There is a name on the harness," she said. Daniel did not ask which name. The silence between them grew heavier than the storm. "Come downstairs," Rachel said. "You need to see it." Daniel remained in the doorway. "No," the answer came too quickly. Rachel studied him. "Daniel." "I said no." His voice was not angry. It sounded frightened. From below came the faint scrape of claws against the floor. Daniel froze. The sound was weak, nearly lost beneath the wind, yet it reached him with the precision of a remembered voice. He stepped into the hall without shoes and followed Rachel downstairs. Each step seemed to cost him something. At the bottom, Marcus stood beside the entrance with a stack of towels. He moved aside when Daniel appeared. The shepherd lay near the furnace room, wrapped in blankets. Dr. Claire Morgan had arrived through the storm and was kneeling beside him, checking his breathing with a stethoscope. Snow melted from her navy coat onto the tile. She looked up, but said nothing. Daniel stopped 10 feet away. For a moment, the old building seemed to hold its breath. The dog's muzzle was grayer than Daniel remembered. His frame was thinner, one ear bent at the tip. Time had touched every visible part of him. Still, there were things time could not easily change. The dark saddle across his back, the amber eyes beneath heavy lids, the faint pale mark near his left ear. Daniel stared until the room blurred around the edges. Rachel held out the harness plate. "It has your name." He did not take it. "Harnesses get reassigned," he said. "Equipment gets reused. Would your full name stay on it?" Marcus asked quietly. Daniel looked at him, then back at the dog. "It is not him." Claire lifted the stethoscope. "Do you know this animal?" Daniel's mouth opened, but no sound came. The shepherd shifted beneath the blankets. His eyes moved toward Daniel, unfocused and tired. For one fragile second, they seemed to settle on him. Daniel took half a step forward. The dog did not lift his head. He did not wag his tail. He did not make the small rumbling sound Daniel had once heard every morning for nearly 6 years. Instead, the eyes closed again. Daniel stepped back. "It is not him," he repeated. This time the words sounded like a plea. Rachel lowered the plate. "Who was he?" Daniel turned toward the frosted window. Outside, snow spun beneath the security light, filling every footprint the dog had made. "Atlas," he said at last. The name left him softly. "He was assigned to me when he was 18 months old. Detection and patrol. United States Marine Corps." Daniel swallowed. He was better at reading a room than most people. Better at reading me. Claire adjusted the blankets around the shepherd. What happened to him? Daniel's hand closed around the edge of the nearby table. 4 years ago, there was an evacuation. I was taken out first because I was unconscious. Atlas was placed with another transport team. His voice became flat. The way people speak when feeling too much would make speech impossible. Their vehicle never reached the transfer point. 3 weeks later, the Corps sent me his identification tag and a folded flag. Rachel glanced at the dog. Was his body recovered? Daniel shook his head once. No, then how did you know? Because they told me. He looked at her, and something old and wounded surfaced in his eyes. Because there was a report. Because there was a ceremony. Because I stood in dress blues at a cemetery and watched them lower a wooden box into the ground. His breath caught, but he forced the next words through. I buried him. The dog stirred at the sound of Daniel's voice. One paw slipped from beneath the blanket and rested on the tile. Daniel stared at it. The nails were worn. A small scar crossed the top joint, exactly where Atlas had once caught. His paw beneath a training gate. Daniel's face lost its remaining color. Claire watched him carefully. Records can be wrong, she said. Dogs can be transferred. Names can remain attached to old equipment. Daniel shook his head more firmly. No, do not do that. Do what? Give me something that can be taken away again. The words filled the room, quiet and final. He backed toward the stairs. Rachel did not stop him. At the first step, Daniel looked over his shoulder. Atlas lay motionless beneath the blankets, but his paw remained stretched toward the place where Daniel had been standing. Daniel's eyes rested on it for a long time. Then he turned away. As his footsteps faded upstairs, Atlas opened his eyes. He did not look toward Rachel, Marcus, or the veterinarian. He looked only at the empty staircase. Claire placed 2 fingers gently against his neck and felt the pulse beneath the fur. Weak, but steady. He heard him, she whispered. Rachel looked down at the old harness and traced the worn letters of Daniel's name. Somewhere between a military report, a sealed wooden box, and 4 lost years, the truth had gone missing. But it had not disappeared. It had walked through a blizzard on 4 tired paws and collapsed at the one door where Daniel Mercer could no longer avoid it. Daniel did not return to his room. He sat on the narrow landing between the first and second floors, where a tall window faced the alley behind Liberty Haven. Snow pressed against the glass in soft white waves, and the city beyond had nearly disappeared. Streetlights glowed through the storm like distant lanterns underwater. He rested his elbows on his knees and listened to the building breathe. Below him, doors opened and closed. Dr. Claire Morgan spoke in a low voice. Marcus carried heated towels from the laundry room. Rachel answered questions Daniel could not make himself ask. He heard everything, yet remained still. For 6 weeks, Liberty Haven had given him a bed, warm meals, and a room with a lock that worked. It had not given him sleep. Most nights, Daniel walked the hallway until his legs ached, counting each step because numbers were easier than memories. He had once been Staff Sergeant Daniel Mercer, a man others trusted to make decisions when confusion filled the air. Now he sometimes stood outside grocery stores for 20 minutes because the noise inside felt too large. He had left 2 jobs in 1 year. He stopped returning calls from his younger sister in Oregon. He sold his truck when the payments became impossible, then told himself he preferred walking. By the time Rachel found him at a bus station with 1 duffel bag and a Marine Corps jacket folded under his arm, Daniel had learned how quickly a life could become smaller without anyone noticing. Atlas had been the last living thing that knew him before that shrinking began. Not the careful man who avoided crowded rooms. Not the silent guest in room 17. Atlas had known the version of Daniel who laughed without checking who was listening. The dog had known when Daniel was tired, when he was angry, and when something inside him had gone quiet. Atlas never demanded an explanation. He simply stayed close. That was why hope felt more dangerous than grief. Grief was settled. It asked nothing. Hope reopened doors Daniel had spent 4 years holding shut. Below, Atlas lay beneath warmed blankets while Claire worked to raise his body temperature slowly. She placed a bowl of water near his muzzle, but he did not drink. She offered a small piece of cooked chicken. He turned his face away. His breathing had improved, yet his attention remained fixed on the stairwell. Each time a floorboard creaked above, one ear lifted. Each time the sound faded, the ear lowered again. Rachel noticed. He is waiting, she said. Claire ran a gentle hand along the dog's shoulder. He is surviving, she replied. Sometimes those are the same thing. Atlas tried to stand once. His legs folded beneath him, and Marcus caught the blanket before it slipped. The dog did not struggle. He only looked toward the stairs with an expression so steady that Rachel felt an ache behind her ribs. Daniel is afraid, she said. Claire glanced up. So is he. Near dawn, the storm weakened. The wind no longer struck the building in hard bursts. It moved softly along the bricks, carrying the faint sound of a snowplow. Several blocks away, Daniel was still on the landing when Rachel found him. She sat 2 steps below without speaking. For a while, they watched the pale sky gather behind the window. Is he alive? Daniel finally asked. Yes. Is he going to stay that way? Rachel did not soften the truth. Claire does not know yet. Daniel closed his eyes. Then I should not go down there. Why? Because if it is Atlas, I already failed him once. Rachel turned toward him. You were unconscious. You did not choose to leave. He would not have understood that. Perhaps he understood more than you did. Daniel's jaw tightened. Downstairs, a quiet scratching sound traveled through the shelter. 3 slow movements across tile. Daniel opened his eyes. Rachel heard his breath change. He used to do that, he whispered. 3 scratches when he wanted me to follow. Then maybe you should. Daniel stood, but he did not descend. His hand rested on the railing, suspended between the floor above and the room below. At the end of the hallway, Atlas lifted his head as if he could feel that hesitation through the walls. 2 wounded souls waited on opposite sides of a staircase, each fearing the same thing, that the other had remembered the leaving, but forgotten the love that came before it. Before Daniel learned how silence could hollow out a room, he had learned how Atlas could fill one without making a sound. Their first winter together had been 6 years earlier at a Marine Corps training facility in North Carolina, where the air smelled of wet pine, diesel fuel, and cold earth. Daniel was 33 then, still carrying the straight-backed confidence of a man who believed discipline could solve almost anything. Atlas was 18 months old, all oversized paws, dark sable fur, and watchful amber eyes. He had already passed every technical test placed before him, but he had also rejected 2 experienced handlers. He obeyed their commands, yet refused their trust. On the morning Daniel met him, Atlas sat at the far end of a fenced training yard while a light rain silvered the ground. The instructor handed Daniel the leash and offered one warning. Do not force him. He remembers. Pressure. Daniel stepped into the yard, stopped 6 feet away, and lowered himself onto one knee. He did not call the dog. He did not reach out. He simply waited. Atlas watched him for nearly 4 minutes. Then the shepherd crossed the distance, sniffed Daniel's sleeve, and placed one paw against his knee. Daniel looked down. Is that your decision? Atlas pressed the paw once more. From that day forward, they moved as though each had been waiting for the other. Atlas learned Daniel's pace, his voice, and the smallest changes in his breathing. Daniel learned the difference between the dog's warning stare and his curious one, between a restless tail and a worried stillness. During long training days, Atlas could find what others missed. During quiet nights, he found what Daniel tried to hide. The first time Daniel woke from a troubled dream in the barracks, Atlas stood beside the bed before Daniel fully opened his eyes. The dog placed one paw on his knee 3 times. Slow. Steady. Daniel's breathing eased. The next morning, before their first exercise, Daniel tapped the front of Atlas's harness 3 times. You check on me, he whispered. I check on you. It became their private signal. 3 taps before entering a building. 3 taps after a difficult search. 3 taps in the dark when words would have carried too far. It never meant danger. It meant something simpler. I am here. You are not alone. Years passed, measured in airports, temporary quarters, training fields, and long roads beneath unfamiliar skies. Atlas grew broader through the chest, calmer in his movements, and silver began to touch the fur beneath his chin. Daniel gained another stripe, another scar near his left eyebrow, and a reputation for never losing control. Only Atlas knew how carefully that control was held together. On their final assignment, the morning began beneath a pale sky. Daniel knelt beside Atlas near a transport area while engines turned over in the distance. The dog's harness was worn smooth at the edges. Daniel checked every buckle, then rested his hand on the nameplate. 1 tap. Atlas looked up. 2 taps. His ears lifted. Before Daniel could give the 3rd, someone called his name from across the pavement. A change in departure order. A vehicle waiting. A decision needed immediately. Daniel stood and handed the leash to another Marine for what was supposed to be 10 minutes. Stay, he told Atlas. The dog remained seated, but his eyes followed Daniel. There was confusion in them. Daniel raised 2 fingers, promising he would return. He never reached him again. Events moved quickly after that. Not with noise Daniel remembered clearly, but with fragments. A bright medical room. Voices above him. The slow turning of ceiling lights as a stretcher rolled down a corridor. When he woke fully 2 days later, Atlas was gone. Daniel asked for him before asking about himself. No one had an answer. The transport records were incomplete. The teams had separated. Names had been entered under the wrong times. Daniel kept repeating the same sentence. I did not give him the 3rd tap. Weeks later, an officer arrived with Atlas's identification tag, a folded flag, and a report written in language too clean for grief. Daniel read every line until the words no longer carried meaning. He attended the ceremony because duty required it. He stood beside a polished wooden box and remembered Atlas waiting on the pavement, watching him walk away after only 2 taps. That unfinished signal followed Daniel home. It waited in empty apartments, in crowded stores, and in the silence before dawn. Now, for years later, he stood on the staircase at Liberty Haven with one hand resting on the railing. Below, an old German shepherd waited beside the furnace room. Daniel could not see him from where he stood, but he could hear the faint movement of claws against tile. Once, twice, then silence. The 3rd scratch did not come. Daniel closed his eyes. Somewhere beneath the years and all the sorrow built upon them, an old promise remained unfinished. And for the first time since the cemetery, Daniel wondered whether Atlas had spent 4 years waiting for him to complete it. By 7 that morning, the storm had weakened to a fine gray snow, and the windows of Liberty Haven had begun to brighten with the first colorless light of day. Atlas lay on a folded mattress near the furnace room, wrapped in dry blankets. A bowl of warm water rested beside him. Dr. Claire Morgan had placed a small monitor near his chest, and every soft pulse of light seemed to measure the distance between hope and loss. His temperature had risen, but only slightly. He had swallowed a few drops of water from a syringe. He had not eaten. Most of the residents were still upstairs, unaware that an old working dog had crossed the city during the night and brought a forgotten life to their door. Daniel stood at the end of the hallway with his hands at his sides. He had finally come down from the staircase, but he had not moved closer. Rachel watched from beside the office. She could see that he was studying every detail. The angle of Atlas's ears, the pale fur around his muzzle, the shape of his paws beneath the blanket. Daniel seemed to be searching for proof and preparing himself not to find it. Claire glanced toward him. He is awake enough to hear you. Daniel did not answer. You do not have to touch him, she added. Just let him know you are here. Daniel took one step forward, then another. The floor creaked beneath his bare feet. Atlas opened his eyes. His amber gaze moved slowly toward the sound. Daniel stopped 6 feet away, the same distance he had kept on the morning they first met. For several seconds, neither moved. The furnace breathed warm air into the narrow room. Snow tapped softly against the rear door. Daniel lowered himself onto one knee. Atlas, he said. The name came out rough, as though it had been in use too long. One of the dog's ears shifted. Nothing more. Daniel waited. It is Daniel. Atlas looked at him, but there was no sudden light in his eyes. No tail against the floor. No paw reaching for his knee. His expression remained distant, clouded by exhaustion and years Daniel knew nothing about. Daniel held out one hand, palm down. Easy boy. Atlas drew his head back. A low sound formed in his chest. It was not loud or threatening. It was the warning of an animal who had learned that uncertainty could be dangerous. Daniel froze. Claire stepped closer, but he lifted a hand to stop her. No, let him choose. Atlas stared at the offered hand. For one fragile moment, Daniel leaned forward, almost believing the scent would cross whatever distance time had built between them. Then Atlas turned his face toward the wall. The movement was slow, but it struck Daniel with the weight of a door closing. He lowered his hand. He does not know me. Rachel came nearer. He is cold, tired, and frightened. He heard my voice. That does not mean he can understand everything yet. Daniel stood. His face had gone still again, but the stillness was different now. It was the kind he used to keep pain from becoming visible. Or he understands exactly who I am. Claire frowned. What does that mean? Daniel looked at Atlas. It means he remembers that I left. You did not leave by choice. Dogs do not read reports. His voice remained quiet. They remember who stayed. Rachel reached for him, but Daniel stepped back. When he is stable, find him a home. Daniel, someone with land. Someone patient. He should not spend his last years in a shelter. Rachel studied his face. You are not talking about what he needs. Daniel turned toward the stairs. I am the last thing he needs. Behind him, Atlas lifted his head at the sound of Daniel walking away. The old shepherd tried to rise. His front legs trembled. Claire steadied him with one hand, but Atlas kept his eyes on the doorway until Daniel disappeared. By evening, the snow had stopped. The shelter settled into its familiar rhythm of quiet conversations, soup bowls, and doors closing for the night. Daniel remained in room 17. He did not come down for dinner. Rachel left a tray outside his door and found it untouched an hour later. Downstairs, Atlas refused food again. He drank only when Claire held the bowl near his muzzle. Each time footsteps crossed the hallway, his ears lifted. Each time the footsteps passed, he lowered his head. Shortly after midnight, Rachel woke to a soft scraping sound beneath her office. She followed it to the furnace room and found Atlas standing unsteadily beside the closed hallway door. He leaned against the wall for support, his blanket trailing behind him. One paw lifted and touched the wood. Once, then again, then a third time. Rachel opened the door, but Atlas did not look at her. He stared toward the dark staircase leading to room 17. The man upstairs believed the dog had turned away because he remembered being abandoned. But Atlas had not been rejecting Daniel. He had been too weak to cross the distance between them. Now, with barely enough strength to stand, he had begun trying anyway. At 12:17 in the morning, the lights inside Liberty Haven flickered once, dimmed, and went out. The furnace gave a tired metallic sigh before falling silent. Darkness settled across the shelter, broken only by the red glow of emergency signs and the white reflection of snow outside the windows. Rachel reached for the flashlight on her desk. In the hallway, doors opened and quiet voices rose from the upper floor. Marcus began checking on the residents while Dr. Claire Morgan hurried toward Atlas. The old shepherd was still standing beside the hallway door, though his legs trembled beneath him. Without the furnace, the cold returned quickly through the brick walls and old window frames. Claire wrapped another blanket around his shoulders. We need to move him to the community room, she said. It holds heat longer. Rachel aimed the flashlight toward the stairs. Daniel stood halfway down, fully dressed now in jeans, boots, and his faded Marine Corps jacket. He had heard the silence of the furnace from room 17. For a moment, his eyes moved from Atlas to the dark hallway behind him. Then training overtook fear. The backup generator? He asked. It has not started. Marcus called from the basement door. Daniel came down the remaining steps. Keep everyone in the center rooms. Close the doors along the outside walls. His voice was calm and certain, carrying an authority Rachel had not heard from him before. He crossed to the utility closet, found 2 battery lanterns, and placed one near Claire. Atlas watched every movement. Daniel avoided looking directly at him. Together, they prepared to move the mattress. Claire took one side. Rachel reached for the other, but Daniel stepped forward. I have it. They lifted carefully. Atlas became restless as the mattress shifted. Beneath him, his breathing quickened. His paws searched for steady ground, and a low, frightened sound rose in his throat. Easy, Claire whispered. You are safe. But the darkness, the sudden movement, and the strange hands around him had pulled Atlas somewhere beyond the shelter. His body stiffened. His eyes widened, fixed on something no one else could see. Daniel recognized it. He had seen the same distant fear in the mirror on nights when the past entered a room before he could close the door. Set him down, Daniel said. Claire hesitated. The temperature is falling. Set him down for 1 minute. They lowered the mattress beside the stairwell. Atlas tried to push himself backward, but the wall stopped him. Daniel removed his jacket and placed it on the floor. Then he knelt 6 feet away. He did not reach out. He did not call the dog's name. Around them, the building remained dark and quiet, as though every room were listening. Daniel placed 2 fingers against the wooden floor. He tapped once. The sound was small, almost nothing. Atlas stopped moving. Daniel tapped a second time. One ear lifted. Rachel raised the flashlight slightly, and the weak beam crossed the dog's face. His amber eyes found Daniel through the darkness. Daniel's fingers hovered above the floor. For years earlier, engines had started before he could finish the signal. Orders had carried him away. A wooden box had been lowered into frozen ground. Every night since then, the missing third tap had lived inside him like an unfinished sentence. Now his hand trembled. "I am sorry," he whispered. Atlas watched him. Daniel lowered his fingers. The third tap sounded through the stairwell. For several seconds, nothing happened. The emergency light above the exit buzzed softly. Snow slid from the roof outside. Daniel remained on his knees, his hand flat against the floor. Then Atlas moved. Slowly, with effort, he pulled one front paw from beneath the blanket. He placed it on the edge of the mattress. Once, Daniel stopped breathing. The paw lifted and touched the mattress again. Twice, Atlas gathered what little strength remained and reached forward a third time. His paw came down against Daniel's knee. The room seemed to change around them. Not brighter, not warmer, but less empty. Daniel bowed his head as Atlas leaned toward him. The old shepherd took one uncertain step from the mattress, then another. Daniel opened his arms without calling, and Atlas pressed his face against the Marine Corps jacket at Daniel's chest. A sound escaped the dog, low and broken, somewhere between a whine and a long-held breath finally released. Daniel buried one hand in the fur behind Atlas's neck. His fingers found the bent ear, the pale scar, and the familiar place where the dog had always rested against him. "I came back," Daniel said, though his voice could barely carry the words. "I came back too late, but I came back." Atlas placed his paw on Daniel's knee once more. Daniel closed his eyes. Rachel turned the flashlight toward the floor, giving them darkness enough for privacy. Claire watched the monitor beside the mattress. Atlas's pulse, weak and uneven minutes before, had begun to steady. The generator started in the basement with a deep mechanical rumble. Lights returned one by one along the hallway. The furnace awakened. Warm air moved through the vents. Yet Daniel did not rise, and Atlas did not look away. For years of reports, grief, and silence remained between them, but something older had survived beneath it all. A promise completed in 3 quiet taps. A Marine who believed he had been forgotten. A K-9 who had crossed a frozen city to prove that loyalty had remembered everything. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving Spokane beneath a clean white silence. Sunlight pressed softly through the frosted windows of Liberty Haven, turning the hallway pale gold. Daniel had not left Atlas's side. He sat on the floor beside the mattress with one hand resting against the shepherd's shoulder, as though he feared the years might take him again if he let go. Atlas slept deeply now. His breathing had steadied, and for the first time since arriving, his body no longer trembled. Dr. Claire Morgan moved quietly around them, checking his temperature and listening to his heart. Rachel brought coffee for Daniel, but he barely touched it. Every few minutes, he looked down at Atlas and traced the familiar scar near the bent ear with his thumb. "He is stronger," Claire said. "That does not mean he is out of danger, but it means he wants to stay." Daniel lowered his eyes. He always did. Marcus entered carrying the old harness in both hands. It had been removed during treatment and cleaned of ice, though the leather remained cracked and the olive fabric showed years of wear. He placed it on the table beside Rachel. "There is something strange about this pouch," he said. "The stitching does not match the rest." Daniel looked up. Near the left shoulder strap, a narrow section of fabric had been sewn closed with dark blue thread. It was not military repair work. The stitches were uneven, careful, and clearly done by hand. Claire examined it. "Someone added this later." Daniel stood slowly. The harness had once been part of his daily life. He knew every buckle, every seam, every place Atlas had worn smooth. That hidden pocket had never been there before. Rachel brought a small pair of scissors from the office. "Do you want to open it?" she asked. Daniel hesitated. For 4 years, every official answer had brought him pain. A report, a folded flag, a wooden box. Now the truth sat inside a seam no one had thought to examine. He nodded. Rachel cut a single thread, then another. The fabric loosened. Inside was a small square of waxed cloth wrapped around a folded piece of paper and a brass key. The paper had been protected from rain, snow, and time. Daniel unfolded it with both hands. The handwriting was shaky but clear. "My name is Ethan Brooks. I have cared for Atlas since April of 2022. If he leaves me, He will be looking for Staff Sergeant Daniel Mercer. Liberty Haven Veterans Shelter, Spokane, Washington. Please help him finish the journey. Daniel read the words twice. The room grew quiet around him. Rachel turned toward the harness. Ethan Brooks. Claire recognized the name first. I know it. He volunteered with retired working dogs in Idaho. Marcus took out his phone and began searching old records. Daniel remained still, holding the note as though it were something fragile and alive. A second line had been written beneath the first, smaller and more personal. He never stopped waiting. Daniel's fingers tightened around the page. Who was he asked. Rachel sat beside the table. We are going to find out. Within an hour, Marcus located a public notice from a veterans service organization. Ethan Brooks had been a retired military dog handler who lived outside Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. He had died 3 months earlier after a long illness. A photograph showed an older man with silver hair sitting on a wooden porch. Atlas sat beside him, wearing the same harness. Daniel stared at the image. Atlas looked healthy there, heavier through the chest, but his eyes were fixed beyond the camera, toward something distant. Claire contacted the organization listed beneath the photograph. A woman named Helen Brooks answered. She was Ethan's younger sister. When Daniel gave his name, she stopped speaking for several seconds. Then she began to cry softly. He found you, she said. Daniel sat down. You knew about me? My brother did. Atlas came to him through a transfer program after a records error. Ethan tried to trace his original handler, but your address had changed. Your telephone number was disconnected. Every letter came back. She explained that Ethan had refused to remove Daniel's nameplate from the harness. He believed the dog still belonged to a promise made before either of them met him. In Ethan's final months, he prepared Atlas for the possibility of being alone. He placed Daniel's name, the shelter address, and the brass key inside the hidden pocket. The key opened a small metal box stored with Ethan's belongings. There is something in it for you, Helen said. He told me I would know when the right person called. Daniel looked toward Atlas. The shepherd had awakened and was watching him from the mattress. How did Atlas know where to go? Daniel asked. Helen's voice softened. Ethan once brought him to Spokane for a veterans event. They stopped outside Liberty Haven. Atlas pulled toward the building and would not leave for nearly an hour. Ethan believed he smelled something that belonged to you. Daniel remembered the Marine Corps jacket he had donated. During his first week at the shelter, before Rachel quietly returned it to him. Atlas had not found an address. He had followed memory. Daniel folded the note carefully and knelt beside him. You kept looking, he whispered. Atlas lifted one paw and rested it against Daniel's wrist. The harness had carried a name, but the hidden message carried something greater. Proof that during every year Daniel believed the bond was gone. 2 strangers had protected it for him. One old man had kept the promise safe. One old dog had carried it through the snow. And now, at last, the truth had arrived in the hands of the man who needed it most. 3 days later, winter sunlight poured through the windows of Liberty Haven, bright enough to make the snow outside glitter, but not warm enough to soften it. Atlas could stand without trembling now. He moved slowly, his paws careful on the polished floor, never straying more than a few feet from Daniel. When Daniel crossed the community room, Atlas followed. When Daniel sat, Atlas lowered himself beside his chair and rested his chin across one boot. The shelter residents had begun leaving small offerings near his blanket. A clean tennis ball, a folded towel, a strip of cooked turkey saved from lunch. Atlas accepted none of them unless Daniel first touched the gift and told him it was safe. To everyone watching, the decision seemed already made. The dog had found his Marine. The Marine had found his dog. But Liberty Haven was licensed to house people, not animals. Its insurance policy allowed service animals only with current medical documentation, and Daniel had neither a permanent address nor the money required for Atlas's continued care. Dr. Claire Morgan had agreed to cover the emergency treatment, but Atlas would need examinations, medicine for his joints, and a stable place to recover. Daniel studied every page Rachel placed before him. The numbers felt like walls rising one after another. He needs more than I can give him, he said. Rachel sat across from him in her office. Morning light rested on the worn Marine Corps jacket folded over his knees. Atlas lay outside the open doorway, watching. He needs you, she replied. That does not pay for food. We can find assistance. And until then, Daniel looked toward the dog. He deserves a house, a yard, Someone who does not sleep in room 17 because he has nowhere else to go. Rachel understood what he was doing. Daniel was turning fear into sacrifice because sacrifice felt more honorable. He believed love meant stepping aside before he could fail again. That afternoon, a white van from Inland Working Dog Rescue stopped beside the shelter. The organization had space at a foster farm 30 miles north of Spokane. The property had heated kennels, open fields, and volunteers experienced with retired military dogs. It was everything Daniel had said Atlas needed. A woman named Karen Ellis entered carrying a new leash and a soft blue coat. She spoke gently, kept her movements slow, and allowed Atlas to smell her hand. "He can stay with us until his records are settled," she explained. "We will take good care of him." Daniel nodded without looking at Atlas. He signed the temporary release form at the bottom of the page. His handwriting shook only once. Karen fastened the new leash to Atlas's collar. Daniel removed the old harness and held it against his chest. The brass name plate caught a thin line of sunlight. "You will be warm there," he told Atlas. "You will have room to run." Atlas stood beside him, listening. Daniel rubbed the bent tip of his ear. "This is the right thing." Karen walked toward the front doors. Atlas followed for 3 steps. Then he stopped. She gave the leash a gentle invitation. "Come on, boy." Atlas looked through the open doorway at the van, the snow, and the road beyond. Then he turned his head toward Daniel. Daniel remained beside Rachel's desk, both hands gripping the harness. "Go," he whispered. Atlas did not move. Karen waited, patient and kind. After several seconds, Atlas backed away from the door. The leash slipped loosely through her fingers as he crossed the lobby. His steps were slow, but certain. He reached Daniel, lowered himself onto the floor, and placed both front paws across Daniel's boots. The old shepherd looked up with an expression that held no confusion. He had already lived with a good man who gave him shelter, food, and care. Ethan Brooks had protected him when Daniel could not. But Atlas had not walked through the storm searching for comfort. He had come for the unfinished promise. Daniel's face tightened. "I have no home," he said. Atlas rested his head against Daniel's knee. "I do not know how to fix myself." One paw lifted and touched him once. "I might fail you." The paw touched him again. Daniel closed his eyes. The third touch came softly, almost patiently. Rachel turned away to hide the tears gathering in her eyes. Karen loosened the leash and placed it in Daniel's hand. "It appears he has made his choice," she said. Daniel knelt and removed the new blue coat, replacing it with the old harness. He adjusted each worn buckle as he had done hundreds of times before. Then he pressed his fingers against the nameplate. 1 tap. Atlas's ears lifted. 2 taps. His tail moved across the floor. Daniel gave the third. "You found me," he whispered. "Now let me become someone worth finding." Outside, the rescue van pulled away empty. Inside, Daniel remained on the lobby floor with Atlas leaning against him. For the first time in years, the future frightened him for a different reason. It was no longer empty. By the time spring reached Spokane, the snow had retreated from the sidewalks in thin gray ribbons, and the trees outside Liberty Haven carried small green buds where ice had once clung. The shelter looked different in the softer light. So did Daniel. He still lived in room 17, but the door now remained open most mornings. A pair of clean work boots stood beneath the bed. His Marine Corps jacket hung neatly on a wooden peg. Beside it rested Atlas's old harness, the brass nameplate polished but never replaced. Daniel had bought a lighter harness for daily walks, one with padded straps that did not press against Atlas's aging shoulders. Still, before leaving the room each morning, he touched the old nameplate 3 times. Atlas always lifted his head at the sound. Liberty Haven had changed too. Rachel spent weeks speaking with insurance representatives, veterans organizations, and local donors. Claire helped create medical guidelines for older service dogs. Marcus cleared an unused storage room near the courtyard and turned it into a warm sleeping area with washable floors, raised beds, and a wide window facing east. A small wooden sign appeared above the door. It read Companion Quarters. The first resident was Atlas. The second was a yellow Labrador named Sunny who belonged to a Vietnam veteran recovering from surgery. Then came a quiet mixed-breed dog named Millie, whose owner had been sleeping in his car rather than surrender her. No one at Liberty Haven called the new space a program at first. It was simply the place where no one had to choose between shelter and loyalty. Daniel became its caretaker. He swept the floors before breakfast, measured food, scheduled veterinary visits, and walked each dog around the courtyard beneath the morning sun. The work did not erase his difficult nights. Some evenings, he still woke with his heart racing and the room feeling too small. But Atlas would rise from the rug, place one paw against Daniel's knee, and wait. Daniel no longer counted the steps in the hallway until sunrise. He counted 3 taps instead. One for the past, one for the present, one for the promise still ahead. In late April, a young veteran named Noah Carter arrived at Liberty Haven. He was 26, with close-cropped blonde hair, pale blue eyes, and a canvas backpack that seemed to hold everything he owned. He had served in the United States Marine Corps and returned home less than a year earlier. During intake, he answered Rachel's questions politely, but never looked directly at her. He declined dinner. He refused a room with another resident. By sunset, he sat alone on the back porch, elbows on his knees, watching rain gather in the courtyard. Daniel recognized the stillness. It was not peace. It was the effort of holding too much inside. He stepped onto the porch with Atlas beside him. Noah glanced at the dog, then looked away. "I am not much of a dog person," he said. Daniel leaned against the railing. "Neither was I, according to myself." Noah almost smiled, but the expression disappeared before it fully formed. Daniel did not ask where he had served. He did not ask what had happened. He simply stood there while rain tapped against the metal roof. After a minute, Atlas moved forward. His pace was slow now, and silver covered more of his muzzle, but his eyes remained clear. He stopped beside Noah and waited. Noah kept both hands clasped together. "What does he want?" he asked. "Nothing," Daniel said. Atlas sat, the porch filled with the smell of wet soil and cedar. Somewhere beyond the fence, a lawn mower started and faded into the distance. Noah's breathing grew uneven. He looked down, embarrassed by something he believed he should have been able to control. Atlas lifted one paw and placed it gently on Noah's knee. Once, Noah froze. The paw touched him again. Twice, Daniel felt the old signal move through the years between them. He could have called Atlas back. He did not. The third touch came softly. Noah lowered his head. One hand opened and rested against Atlas's neck. No words followed. None were needed. Daniel watched from several feet away, his eyes fixed on the dog who had once crossed a frozen city to find him. Atlas had completed that journey, but his work had not ended at the door of room 17. What had saved Daniel was already moving outward, quiet as morning light beneath a closed door. Rachel appeared in the hallway and paused when she saw them. Daniel met her eyes. She said nothing. On the wall behind her hung a framed photograph of Ethan Brooks sitting beside Atlas on an Idaho porch. Beneath it, inside a small glass case, rested the brass key from the hidden pocket. The box it opened had contained Atlas's original transfer papers, letters Ethan had written to Daniel, and one final note. Daniel had read it so many times he knew every word. A good dog does not belong only to the person he finds. Sometimes he belongs to the road that brought them both home. Outside, the rain softened. Noah remained seated with his hand buried in Atlas's fur. Daniel stepped back into the shelter and left the door open behind him. Years earlier, he had believed loyalty was a promise between two souls. Now he understood it could become a bridge. One wounded life crossed first, then another. And sometimes the quietest miracle was not being rescued, but learning how to stand on the safe side and wait for someone else to arrive.